Okay, well, welcome back. We're on our second video in this series. We looked at the place of authority. Where does authority come from? In our last video, we contemplated that a little bit, and we saw that the dispersement of authority changed the way people thought. And that's what we're going to look at now is how did this thinking sort of unravel? So let's look at part one, the age of democratic revolutions. As we said in our last video, knowledge, force, and wealth were the traditional symbols of power. If you were a clan chief, you were probably given that position, that power and authority, because you were a mighty warrior. You proved yourself on horseback and were able to win many battles and protect your little clan from outsiders. We today, excuse me, we today and might go to certain parts of the world and find the shamans or the curanderos, who are looked to because of their special knowledge of healing and the spirit world and things like that. It's pretty common to see knowledge, special knowledge, the might, the force, and the wealth to sort of rise to the top, and they're the ones that everybody follows and gives their authority to. But as the commercial revolution and the military revolution sort of spread, the printing press goes out, the Reformation sort of cuts the head off of the elitism in the Roman Catholic Church, and knowledge is shared, science is shared, special people sort of rise to the top in the military. These sorts of things, and that middle class is starting to get better. There's a shift in that personal interests, my interests, outweigh oftentimes the interests of the king or the nobility. Excuse me. If you look at this from like left to right, you'll see how this sort of plays out. Back in the day, the Pope, the church, held the highest sort of authority. Even kings bowed to the Pope and the Pope's wishes, or would request permissions to do certain things because the Catholic Church, the church had ultimate control, ultimate authority. The king, of course, being underneath that, and then the peasants, the commoners, will be underneath that. But as knowledge is shared, wealth is shared, military is shared, it's not the Catholic Church who's getting the military, it's going to be the kings. Remember the mercantile fiscal military state, as the king goes over and gives away these trade monopolies to companies. Companies are using banks to go over and finance these new ventures. That money is kicked back to the king. The king is making bigger and stronger armies and navies and putting a lot of money in his pocket. So it would make sense that, at least at first, the kings would be the ones that gained the more authority part. And we do. We see this sort of the Pope, king, and they kind of shift in that next phase of dispersing of authority. And the king sort of puts his foot down in many ways and many times over the church and says, no, still commoners are down at the bottom. That money, that wealth, that knowledge hasn't trickled down far enough to really affect them yet. But by the time you get to the end of the 1700s, 1760s, around there, the peasantry is no longer ignorant, they're not illiterate, and they're not always poor. They have money, they're able to read more, and they're gaining knowledge. And so there's this shift as authority is dispersed. And now they want more and more. Personal interest takes rise over others. Now, before we go into the specifics of how the democratic revolutions sort of like played out, we need to get some terms down. We need to get some definitions down. So the first one is constituted order. This is a common thought, idea, the manner in which a society is structured or organized by laws, principles, and social hierarchy. That would be the Constitution. It's not something that is written down. It's not like our U.S. Constitution. It was just the expectation. Citizens in Europe or in a city or in a town sort of expected certain privileges, certain protections that they felt the law of that region sort of granted them. They would expect the king to sort of comply, do his part to protect, to care for, to abide by that constituted order, those unwritten constitutions that sort of defined society. So constitution or constituted order is the accumulation of privileges, liberties, and traditional protections in which everybody in the society has his or her place or order. A merchant would be able to expect certain protections and certain rights, certain allowances, because he's a merchant. That was just expected. Someone who is a lord or a duke would have certain expectations, certain rights, certain allowances and privileges that was awarded to him or to her, if it's a duchess or a lady, et cetera, et cetera. And those were considered the constitutional understanding of that day, that region. There was also this term called despotism or tyranny. Those are bad. These are an environment in which a ruler ignores or violates the privileges, liberties, and traditional social order. In other words, he violates the Constitution. He violates the constituted order. He violates what is expected of him, and that expectation is, in the minds of the people, controlled by the laws that they expect to be upon them and upon their region. I'm a citizen of London, therefore I should have certain privileges that someone who is a citizen in France or in Paris does not have. Whether it be privileges of just living and being able to live in the city, whether it be how I get processed through judicial, going through the courts. I would have certain rights and certain privileges. I could expect certain things that perhaps somebody from Paris would not be able to have. That would be what I would expect. Well, if the ruler, the ruling class, does not hold up to their end of this constitutional order or constituted order, they would be considered despots or tyrannical in their nature. But mind you, not all kings were considered despots or tyrannical. Some kings were considered very good, very benevolent. There's another term, and that's intermediaries. And if you think about it, it sort of sounds like in-betweeners, the people that are in between, and that's literally what you're talking about. These are notable citizens within a society who believe they possess privileges and liberties accustomed to them for their position or their citizenship. Again, these are the folks that think, okay, I am a citizen of London, I live in London, therefore I have certain privileges, certain expectations would be appropriate for me. But someone from another town, another country, should not share those same privileges. They can't expect those things. These are the intermediaries. These are not all citizens, and we'll see why. Intermediaries are people such as like the city councils, parliament, people who serve in parliament, governors, court clerks, guild members. These would be the intermediaries, the ones in between, say, the king and the peasants. So who are these intermediaries? Who were they at this time? Well, obviously the nobles would be intermediate, the lords, the ladies, the knights, the people of certain families who had the birth name given to them. They would obviously be part of those intermediaries. They would definitely think they had certain rights and privileges and should expect them. Priests, another one. They're a sort of an elite exclusive group. They have certain expectations. They should be given certain honors, certain protections. They would definitely be in that. Now, there's also a few wealthy people. Now, as, mind you, we're getting that middle class. We're getting the company people, the new ship captains. They're starting to come into new money. As the new money people sort of rise, they get to buy their way into that intermediary category. They may buy a job, a certain office or position in the city. They might buy a position as a city councilman, or they might be a court clerk. They might jump into a judge's position, something along those lines, a magistrate's position, and they've bought that position. Well, those people, they expect certain return on their privilege, on their place in society. They are intermediaries. They were then classified over time. They picked up the name aristocracy. The aristocracy. They were the upper snobby people. And in many movies, you would see the upper snobs. They were at the balls in those big gowns and all of the festivals, and they wanted to be invited, and it was very important to be seen. Those were the aristocracy. It was elite, exclusive, and they were the ruling class. They initially had that authority because they were the wealthy. They were the ones in position. They were the citizens. Not everybody was considered a citizen. Well, so where did the struggle, these democratic revolutions, where did the struggle between who has authority and who doesn't? And what authority do certain people have and what authority do they not have? Well, it really starts between the powers, the existing powers, the nobility on one side and the king or the upper ruling class on the other. The parliament, it would be or the aristocracy. We'll put parliament and aristocracy in that same sort of category. Those intermediaries, they felt they had certain rights and certain privileges. And the king's job was to ensure, in their mind, to ensure those privileges and those protections, et cetera, et cetera. But in the king's mind is a little bit different. King's mind is not focused on just these personal interests of these nobilities, of the aristocracy. He is concerned with what they call general welfare. The general welfare is the state and health and protection of his country, of his kingdom. And so his focus is to focus on the general welfare, the general overall welfare, whereas Parliament is focused on personal welfare and personal liberties and personal privileges and personal protections. Protect my property, O king. And the king's job is, I'm going to protect the kingdom, not necessarily just your area. And so these began to struggle. And where we're going to get some of the biggest fighting is between these two. The king wants to protect the country. The parliament wants the king to take care of their own liberties. And the bottom line question is who's going to pay for it? So as we move further into our next video, we're going to look at how these democratic fighting, these revolutions around the Atlantic world sort of like started to develop. And where do we see these fights sort of play out? And so next video, part 2 of the Age of Democratic Revolutions, we'll see and discuss those things.